Uh, Today I'm here with Dr. Dina Mody, who's the medical director of the Cytopathology Laboratory at Houston's Methodist Hospital, as well as a professor of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at the Medical College of Cornell University. Dr. Mody, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So we'll start kind of from the beginning and just go from there. You're originally from Dahanu, India. Could you speak a little bit about when and where you were born?
So I was in Bombay. I was born in what was then Bombay, India. My parents actually lived in a village called Dahanu, and it was about 100 miles north of Bombay along the western shores of India. And as soon as I was born, they took me back to my village, and I spent my first 5 years on the farm over there. And then, since there were no English medium schools in the village, everybody sent their kids either to boarding schools or to stay with a relative in a bigger city where there were English medium schools. And so at the age of 5, with much fanfare, I boarded my bullock cart and off to the railway station I went. And then from there on a steam engine to Bombay, where I went and stayed with an aunt, my dad's sister, and went to a Catholic school. And from kindergarten through high school. It was right across the street from my house, and I think they gave me a very good education. And then college and medical school was all in Bombay at GS.
Wow, okay. So do you have any like specific vivid memories or stories that you have from that time, or any difficulties, like especially moving away for school?
Well, yeah, I cried every time, and so did my sisters. My older sisters were in boarding school, but they were much older than I was. And so every time the holidays ended, we had 6 weeks in summer, 3 weeks in October for Diwali, and then a week in December for Christmas. And then every time we had to get back on the train, there was an uncle who took us to our destination. We would cry and try to postpone it by a day, but hey, it is what it is. As a kid, it's hard, but you cry for a couple of days once you get back to your destination, and then you get over it. You wait for the next holiday.
Wow, yeah. So what were your parents like? What were their occupations?
So my parents, they were farmers and horticulturists. They had orchards. They grew a fruit called chiku. And of course, back then in India, if you had land, you also had to grow rice and wheat and sell it to the government. So that's what they did. They lived there, and it was a simple little village life. Now the village is the last stop on the commuter rail from Mumbai. So it's no longer this village. Last time I was there, it was like a Bombay suburb, and it's lost its charm. But I have some very happy memories of all the kids getting in the bullock cart and going to the beach. And the only instruction we got was, don't touch the jellyfish. And there were like 15 of us in the bullock cart, okay? And one person supervising. All he did was a head count. And guess what we did? We touched the jellyfish.
I imagine it would be
Don't touch
hard.
the crab. Guess what the boys did? They got the crab. So, but those are happy memories. We're all dispersed all over the world. Some are still there, some are in Australia, and I'm here in the US. So is my sister. And one sister is still there on the farm, but it's no longer a farm.
Those sound like wonderful memories. Can I ask what kind of values your parents like emphasized to you, religious or otherwise, and how do those values sort of shape your current philosophies and maybe your approach to work?
So, I'm one of those ancient Zoroastrians, the world's oldest religion. And it was very simple. It's more a philosophy on how you live your life. So it's good thoughts, good words, good deeds, and respect. There's one God, and we are all God's creations, and you have to respect all of God's creation, living and the non-living. So in other words, you got to respect the animal kingdom, the fish kingdom, the bird kingdom. You got to respect the water, the fire, the whatever. We're known as fire worshippers, but that's just a symbol of showing our appreciation to God. But these are all God's creation. And now when you think about it in the current context of climate change and what is going on, this is an ancient religion, like 4,000, 3,000 years old. And back then, they were talking about respecting all of God's creations. There is no prophet or gods or goddesses that we worship. But when my ancestors came to India as refugees, they were given a refuge on the condition that they blended into the Indian customs. So they adopted many of the Indian customs, but it's not like we worship them. But if there's a Hindu festival and it involves eating, hey, we're there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, if it involves food, my community, we're all in.
I'm gonna skip a little bit and we'll come back to family, but I'd like to talk about, so from your CV, I understand that you did a residency at a hospital in Bombay before coming to the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston in 1981.
Hmm.
Was that the first time that you came to the US, and why did you come to Houston specifically?
Well, yeah, it was my husband. So my husband got recruited when he finished his master's in engineering at the University of Oklahoma. He was recruited by the recruiters that go to the campus. And of course, he didn't really have any major opportunities in India. So when this company, which is part of Schlumberger now, offered him a position in Houston, he took it and they sponsored him. They got him to Houston, and that's how he ended up in Houston. And although the families knew each other, our meeting was more like a blind date. I was already doing my residency, and um, he was visiting, and the two sisters schemed to introduce us, or I didn't know, but anyway, the long and short of it is he proposed to me after a week, and a week later we got married. And then I was like, okay, we applied, and the papers will take 2 or 3 years. So I said, great, I'll finish my residency, take my boards, and then come and do my subspecialty here. Well, there was a new president in the US and they had changed, whatever. Anyway, my papers came in 7 weeks. And I had to literally drop everything because, you don't have the option of saying, oh, no, can you wait for 3 years? Oh, no, 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 that doesn't work. It's now or done. And so I had no choice. I came here, and when I got here, it was May. And of course, the residency match had already ended in March, and the next one was not till next March. And so I thought, well, I was studying, I'd already taken the other exam, the TOEFL and the ECFMG, but I was working on the Texas board exam, which you could do in those days, right after you got here. So I was working on that, and I said, well, time to pick up the applications for the residency. And this was pre-computer. Remember, this is 1981. It's pre-computers, and also you actually asked for the form or you went and picked up. So my husband dropped me off in the medical center barely 3 weeks after I got here. So it was like the first week of June. And I went to UT, picked up the form, went to Baylor and picked up the form. And as I was picking up the application form, I heard these two admins talking about an opening. I said, hey, there's an opening? And he said, no, no, it's not in internal medicine, it's in pathology. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to be sitting at home for a year, probably getting pregnant. Might as well do something and learn something. So I said, hey, I'm going to be sitting at home for a year. Can I apply? I'd rather do something rather than be bored at home. And they said, oh, no, you got to go to Methodist. That's where the program director is. So I huffed and puffed my way to Methodist. The program director just left. It was 5:05 when I got here. And the admin was leaving, and she said, so I gave her my phone number. I said, well, I'm available. I've got she said, sure, 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 sure. And then I waited. My husband picked me up at 7 o'clock. I thought, this is a nice hospital. This is really nice compared to King Edward Memorial, where I was training. In those days, King Edward Memorial in Bombay, we call it KEM, which was the main hospital for my medical school. It was a 2,500 bed Bombay Municipal Hospital. And they had a 24/7 autopsy service because of the religious laws there at the the medical examiner's office. But anyway, I thought, this is a really nice place, Kapen. And of course, I didn't know at the time that this is where Michael DeBakey and Earl Stanley Crawford basically revolutionized and invented cardiovascular surgery. Had no clue. Clueless as a clam. Anyway, I went home. Next, I told my husband what happened. He said, great. Next day, I got a call from the program director, and he kind of talked to me on the phone. And I was honest with him. I said, look, I was a medicine resident. I'd like to do medicine, but I realized what's sure, well, let me talk to we have an opening, but we understand your situation. I said, okay. Then I'll call you back depending on what we decide. Calls me back 2 days later and says, we've decided to interview you. I said, okay. I didn't own a suit. I didn't have a driver's license. So I wore whatever dress I had. I showed up for the interview. And there were 13 different people who interviewed me. And everyone asked me the same question. Why do you want to be a pathologist? I said, well, actually, I want to do internal medicine, but here's my situation. I'm going to be stuck at home, studying for this exam, maybe getting pregnant. I'd rather work and learn something different. It was never on my radar. And I said, I'll apply in the meantime. And I told everyone the same thing. It didn't even occur to me that I should lie or, sugarcoat it. And, oh, how wonderful pathology. And he said, okay, we'll let you know. And then 3 days later, they called me and said, you can start July 1. I still didn't have a suit. I still didn't have a driver's license. When I got here, my husband would drop me off early morning, and then I used to take the bus because we used to live in Spring. It took me an hour and a half each way. So I would start at like 5:30 in the morning on the bus, and then I would change the bus in downtown and make it to the medical center on the other bus to be here by 7 o'clock. But I did that, and we did that for 9 months and applied to medicine, got my interviews. Then in December, I got a call from the program director of medicine saying, hey, we have an unexpected opening. You can transfer into medicine, and you don't have to go to the match. And by then I was beginning to like pathology because I actually had a life, and it was very different from what it was in India. And I said, well, let me talk to my husband. So we talked, and I said, really, I'm torn. I don't know what to do. And so he said, tell them no just now. Tell them you'll just go to the match and we'll think about it. And so I said, I don't think I'm going to take this. I'm beginning to like pathology, and the rest is history. I was used to working like a dog as an internal medicine resident. So when the residents here complained that, oh, we were working till 6:30 doing this, I was like, what are you complaining about? I was used to working till 10 o'clock at night. I had to live in the outermost quarters, which is a resident medical officer's quarters. And then you were up at 4 in the morning drawing blood because we didn't have phlebotomists back at King Edward Memorial back then. So needless to say, I was quite productive in my spare time. I did projects with the professors, and they were quite amused. I'm amazed that within 3 months of getting there, I had an abstract at the United States Canadian Academy of Pathology meeting, which, so I didn't know all that. I just did my thing. And as a pathology resident, I had to go on rounds, and 6:30 in the morning, pediatric rounds at Bentob, and some kid with diarrhea, and every day the kid still had diarrhea, and they were thinking of Crohn's and all the illnesses. And I said, how about amoebiasis? They looked at me and they said, we don't have amoebiasis here. I said, well, sure looks like it. 2 days later, the kid ruptured the colon. They took to surgery. Guess what it was? Amoebiasis. They all thought I was so smart. I was like, well, I saw a lot of that. I had amoebiasis. I know what amoebiasis looks like. So it was just, I just put what I learned over there, and I have to say, people were very accepting. They kind of saw me and they were like, this is a strange bird. Where is she from? And then they would ask me, where are you from? And I would say, I'm from India. And they say, well, then they'd say, oh, well, you don't look Indian. I'm like, well, India has all kinds, and I'm one of them. So we already had like 4 or 5 generations in India. So we were refugees to India.
That sort of leads into my next question, which is, was there any significant like culture shock or discrimination or unfair treatment that you felt when you first moved here?
Well, actually, having spent most of my life in Bombay, not in the village after I was 5, except for the holidays, I was pretty westernized because, I went to a Catholic school and, the Catholics were pretty progressive there. And so I was quite westernized. So I didn't have problem fitting in. The only problem was I couldn't understand all the American idioms and, and I had some very kind co-residents who would say, well, let me tell you about this one at 5 o'clock after all the day as I ended. And he says, well, when they say this in Texas, it means that. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. I was like, whatever. But at the time, I was asked, everybody asked me, where are you from? Like, because everybody like, who is this strange bird? And I remember there was one time I spoke at the meeting and everybody, as they were leaving, shook hands and said, they would say something nice. And then they would say, Doc, where are you from? And my colleague with me, finally, after the 8th one, she couldn't take it anymore. She said, now, where do you think I'm from? She got so mad at it. And I was like, no, it's just, people are curious. I don't get offended by it. Yeah, there was some jokes made. You just shrug yourself off. Our community in India was a little unique, so we were always the butt of many jokes. So I was like, okay, a few more bad jokes, whatever. You just move on. I didn't take it very seriously or get too offended by it. And sometimes if there was a sarcastic remark made, I probably didn't understand it. So you just trumble along.
So you've talked a little bit about your education, but I'm sure you've been through many, many years. Could you just sort of describe what the process of going through medical training and everything looked like?
So India Medical School was very competitive at the time. It still is, but they only had 4 medical colleges in Bombay. And so there were something like, I think less than 500 slots between the 4 schools. And a third were reserved for the scheduled tribes. And so you're really competing for some 300 and something spots. And there were 21,000 students applying. And it was strictly on your ranking on that interscience exam. And I think in Bombay University that year, I ranked something like 20th. So you get invited, and then during your meeting with the deans of the 4 medical schools, they pick where you go, but they give you a choice. Where would you like to be? And of course, GS was the best. It was always, for years and years and years, it was number 1 or number 2 in the country. The other one was All India Institute in Delhi, which is where all the politicians went. So they were the privileged one, but we were the always 1 or 2 or 1 big competition. So I, of course, picked GS. And that's how so GS is Seth Gordon Das Sundardas Medical School. So we just called it GS. And the hospital was King Edward Memorial, which was a 2,500 bed hospital. And that was medical school for me. When I went to medical school, the whole idea was that I would do my medical schooling, do my internal medicine, and then go back to my village and open up. In fact, my dad had even purchased a little office space near the railway station that I could help the locals. And so I worked very hard because in India, they control the number of slots you have for subspecialty training. They want most people to do just primary care. So the people who could take the boards for the internal medicine or surgery or, all the subspecialties were controlled. So internal medicine only had 8 slots. And again, it's strictly on your grades. And so I made it I was number 7. There were 8 slots. And I made it. And it was the first time in like 9 years that a woman actually qualified for that slot. So I was very happy. And the chief of medicine, who was the first female chief of medicine, was really excited. And unfortunately, I had to leave. And I gave up that slot. So she was very disappointed. And I was really apologetic. But my life took a totally different trajectory. And I told her I'll make her proud. I meant to go meet her last time I was in India, but she had already passed. So, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Well, I
But I
guess,
told them, I did something with my life. So,
yeah, you're very, very successful. So, um, were there any, I guess maybe she was, but important role models or mentors that sort of developed your interest or set your path on your current career?
well, there were in India, she was probably the one. But having, I just had one focus in India: get into med school, so work your butt off, and then get into internal medicine. And so that was my focus. I had my little clique of friends from medical school. We still communicate on WhatsApp. We have a group. Over here, I have to say, there was a chief resident at the time. Her name was Mary Schwartz. She's still there. She's the vice chair now. And really, when I was doing my residency, she was very helpful, and she really was sort of the role model. She grew up in Hawaii, went to Stanford Medical School, WashU, undergrad Stanford Medical School, WashU, and then Baylor for residency. So when I started, she was my chief resident who would show me around. She even rescued my car when it was getting towed away from outside the library. We chased the tow truck and then paid, and we really got the car released. But sharp as a whistle still is, and she really, in some ways, her work ethics kind of rubbed off on me. Back in the days, really, there weren't that many women and in pathology, and it was pretty male dominated. And then the few that were there usually many of them didn't stay in academia. They went into some private practice in a smaller town. As a resident, I think I was the first chief resident with a foreign accent and a woman for Baylor pathology. So I have to say they were pretty open-minded. The program director, Dr. Malcolm McGavran, his father was one of those missionaries, and he had spent some time in India. He spoke better Hindi than I do, so I had to keep my conversations with him down to monosyllables because mine was pretty bad. Catholic school Hindi is not very good. But he was tough, and he didn't shy away from criticizing you. But it was done in a positive way, like believe in yourself, And I remember but he was very good about giving you feedback. So my first weekend call as a resident at Bentob, when I started out there, my first rotation was at Bentob. Mary Schwartz was my chief resident, so she made sure we all did our stuff. And I remember at Bentob, in those days, all the labor and delivery was at LBJ Hospital, which doesn't exist anymore. Now there's a high-rise there. Not LBJ, Jefferson Davis. And DeBakey was the chief of surgery, and all the stillborn babies and whatever, the babies who died during birth and whatever, they would hold the bodies there and bring them every Friday evening to Bentob for the person who was on call on Saturday to do the autopsies. And of course, the person on call on Saturday, the resident and the faculty, would do that. And I had this really strange case, and things weren't adding up why this kid had what it had. So I told my chief and my attending at the time, Dr. Hansup Kim. And he said, yeah, I think we better consult the Texas Children's people. So I took my slides and went to Texas Children's and consulting them. And they said, yeah, this is really strange. Let's present it at the conference. Well, the conference was at Jefferson Davis. And I didn't have a car to drive at the time now. So I went with Dr. Langston. We drove to Jefferson Davis and we presented. And at that time, the Texas Children's people would also go to Jefferson Davis. And they also thought that this was unusual. And they said, talk to the fellow and said, let's find out if they still have the body. We would like to do a biopsy of the skin because the skin fibroblasts live for a month after death. And so the fellow found the body and did a biopsy, grew the fibroblasts, and it turned out it was the first time they found that this particular deficiency would cause hydrops fetalis in a baby. And so that fellow at Texas Children's who went and got the biopsy, and anyway, we wrote it up and it was written in Lancet. It was published in Annals of Internal Medicine. And then I was like, great, I got a paper. I wrote a paper. And then 2 weeks after the paper came out, I had a knock on my, in the residence room and said, hey, congratulations. I said, what? Oh, the paper is out. She says, no, you got mentioned in Lancet. In the editorial, that how sometimes, you make these strange discoveries and sometimes all it takes is an astute pathology resident. And I was like, oh, wow, that's great. I had no clue what the Lancet was at the time. I was like, oh, that's nice. Thank you. Well, the resident, the fellow at pediatric genetics at Texas Children's, her name was Huda El Hibri. She's now Huda Zogby, and the famous Huda Zogby. So that was my first paper. It was the autopsy the first weekend I was on call. So crazy things happen. You just go along with the flow and just be yourself. And so I have to say, I was a resident at Baylor, and on the blood bank, they would often get us to, we would have to help out on these cardiovascular cases that were bleeding. And, Dr. Yon, the blood banker, was in charge. And I guess they got so used to seeing me around that if they couldn't find Dr. Yon, they'd call me. So I'd come out of whatever hole I was in, go and then I would find Dr. Yon, and then we take care of the patients. And that's how Earl Stanley Crawford and DeBakey got to know about me. And I believe it was Earl Stanley Crawford, him and DeBakey were tight. They were like the ones who invented cardiovascular surgery, modern cardiovascular surgery. So he was the one who I think mentioned to the chairman that you need to hire this gal. And I remember when I had an offer from MD Anderson to do a fellowship there. And I was so excited. I told my program director, and he said, oh, that's great. Have you accepted it? I said, no, I want to talk to my husband first and tell him if that's a good idea. And 20 minutes later, the chairman called me in his office and offered me a position at Baylor. And he said, I don't know which hospital I'll put you at, but you have 3 choices: VA, Methodist, or Conroe. And so I did a 1-month rotation at Conroe. I would get there at 9 in the morning. I would be done by 3, and I was bored to tears. I went back and told him, I said, no, I don't think I can survive it. This is too slow for me. And I was chief resident, so I had to supervise the VA residents. And I told him, I don't think VA is for me again. It's a 10 to 3 job. I need to be busier. I think I'll stay at Methodist. He said, it's busy. I said, yeah, it's busy. Yeah, that's fine. I like it. I came from the internal medicine side. I'm used to working like a dog. This is the place for me. And I've never looked back. And I had some people like Dr. Harlan Spute, who was like, one of the best surgical pathologists. He mentored me, my program director, Dr. Malcolm McGavran. And then in 1986, Dr. Ramsey, who was a very famous cytopathologist and was in San Antonio, moved to Houston and joined our department. And that's when he sparked my interest in cytopathology. Till then, in those days, you could only take 3 boards. So I already had my anatomic and clinical path board, so I could take 1 more. And the choice was blood bank or cyto. And Dr. Ramsey said, no, you got to do cyto, you got to do cyto. And Dr. Yon was saying, you got to do blood bank, you got to do, and of course, it was Crawford and DeBakey. And then, by then I had my second child. By the way, in those days, there was no maternity leave. You only got 3 weeks, and that was your vacation time. If you took a 4th week off, that was without pay. So, two young kids. I was on call for blood bank, 22 calls in one night. My husband said, I think I'm going to decide. You're taking the cytopath boards and giving up the blood bank. Dr. Ramsey was very happy. Dr. Yon hasn't forgiven him for it still. But yeah, it was really interesting. As residents, we got 3 weeks off. And as faculty, the previous chair was like, he didn't want anybody getting pregnant. Well, there were only 2 young women who could potentially get pregnant. Otherwise, it was all old guys. And when I heard he was retiring, I said, time to get pregnant, because by the time they find the next one, it'll be another 6 to 9 months. And so I got pregnant with my second child, and I called my administrator to find out, hey, what's the maternity leave policy for attendings at Baylor? And there was this dead silence. And I said, Wesley, are you on the line? He said, yeah, I'm on the line. I'm thinking. I'm like, thinking what? He says, well, I'm trying to think who was the last person who was pregnant. It turns out the last woman who had a kid, her kids were in her 30s, and she had them in New York before she moved. So he said, I don't know, I'll have to go and check. So after 2 weeks, he calls me, he says, well, as a matter of fact, we don't have a maternity policy at Baylor. He said, it's whatever you've saved from your vacation time. So that was 4 weeks then. So I took my 4 weeks off, and while I was on maternity, they picked the new chairman of Baylor, Dr. Michael Lieberman, who really, I would say, he was very open-minded about women, and work-life issues, and very supportive of his faculty. And it was very different when he got here. He came from Fox Chase in Philadelphia. And although Ramsey and Spute and McGavran were my mentors, Mary Schwartz is my chief, I would consider her my peer mentor. I think the chairman sort of changed the whole tone. And that was a breath of fresh air. In retrospect, at that time, I didn't realize it because there was so much going on, little kids, trying to juggle. I remember there was a time when my husband worked in Dallas for 9 months, and I was here with my son. I hadn't had the second one yet. And if the school called or the daycare called and said he's saying I had to take him home, and I had to literally sneak out and leave the slides on my scope and leave the dictaphone on and go out with the door open, lights on. And then I would take him home. My mother I had to bring her from India so that she couldn't drive. She was a village person, but she would keep the baby. And then I would sneak back in, and then I would work till late till I got done with my cases. And there was a little back door. You could sneak in through the underground, like you were going to the morgue, and then take the tunnel and get out. So that's what I used to do, because really, I mean, Dr. Schwartz at that time had not had babies, so she didn't understand what I was going through. And we couldn't afford a nanny, so we got mom, but mom couldn't drive, and it was, but you just juggle many balls and you move on. That's the life I chose, and I was happy. It didn't even occur to me to, that this is wrong, and I only got 4 weeks off. At the time, in retrospect, it makes sense, but at the time, you're just so caught up in your world that you didn't realize that gee, I shouldn't be doing this, sneaking out with my lights on and the microscope on. And like I was looking at slides and I just went off to the toilet or something. But now, yeah, that would be horrible. In retrospect, it was, but it's okay, whatever.
Wow, that's really interesting. Going to a bit of a different topic, you mentioned earlier your first paper, and I know that you've written many, many things since then, and you published a textbook.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the process of that, getting a book published?
This is the third edition, actually. So there's a first and a second. So in 1995, I got appointed. By then, I was already Dr. Ramsey, who was in charge at Methodist of the cytology lab. I had taken my boards and passed them. He made me the associate director of the lab. So I was in charge of all the quality assurance. And you might want to look up, there was CLIA 88 back in 88, because 87, Walt Bogdanovich did the story on the bad practices in cytology and how people died because their cervical cancers were missed. And so Congress got into the act, there were congressional hearings, and they got the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments of 1988, which came down heavily on cytology. And so there were a lot of mandates that had to be implemented. And Dr. Ramsey put me in charge and said, well, Dina, you're going to do it for our lab. And I'm like, okay. So I was the associate director, and the College of American Pathologists inspects us. So we were in our inspection cycle. They came, and one of the famous cytopathologists from Virginia, VCU, Dr. Frabel, was the inspector. And he did a very thorough inspection, and he didn't find anything wrong with the lab. So he actually told, I didn't know there was a committee at the College of American Pathologists that was dealing specifically with good practices and trying to set up a quality assurance and proficiency testing program, etc. So he said, this gal would be good. So I got invited to be on the cytopathology committee of the College of American Pathologists. So I said, yeah, sounds like a good idea. Dr. Ramsey said, yeah, do it. Dr. Lieberman said, of course, do it. So 4 times a year, I had to go to Chicago and attended the meetings. And it was my second meeting where there was some discussion. So cytology has the screening part, which everybody knew as the pap smear. And then there's the diagnostic part, which is the fine needle aspiration, where we do the biopsies and all. We have a clinic here where we do it. And the college had nothing on the non-gynae part and the FNA. I said, why don't we have anything on this? We're all concentrating on gyn. That's because Congress has told us. What about this? And they said, oh, it's a lot of work. Why don't you put together something for us? I said, okay, I'll write you a proposal. So within a couple of weeks, I went back and I wrote my proposal, sent it, emailed it to them. That time the emails were just coming about. I sent it to them and then presented it. And the board approved it. They said, yeah, this is a very good idea. So I actually started the non-GYN program for the College of American Pathologists. And now it's like one of the largest programs they have. So I became the vice chair of the committee in charge of the non-GYN, while we were also doing the gynecologic stuff. So 2 days before the regular meeting, the non-gynae group would go and we would do our thing. And then, so I got the program started in like 9 months from concept to implementation. It's the fastest program they've had. And everybody was like, ooh, this is interesting. This woman did it. And I did have help. Dr. Frabel was there. I had my friend Diane Davy. And then after vice chair, when the Diane, who was chair, she said, hey, basically I was the next chair. And by then the College of American Pathologists, I started getting awards and all that. I was a chair of the committee, and that's when the proficiency testing for GYN hit nationally. So I had to get the program through Medicare, and they approved it. I was also invited to be on CLIAC, so I had to go to Atlanta twice a year. So I did that for 4 years in between everything else I was doing. By then the kids were already in high school and all that. And then while I was there was this group of radiologists who had started they had a unique software where you could really a different way of publishing. And none of the big famous guys wanted to deal with it. Like, oh, it's too much work, too much computer. Blah, blah, blah. So one of them asked me, and I said, well, hey, I've done this, I'll try this. So I had to go, and it's a different way of doing, but you can see what your paper is going to look like and all that. And it was a company owned by a radiologist called Ameris. And I did the first edition of my book, and it did quite well. I told them I will do the book. By then, I was already a full professor at Baylor. So I told them I'll do the book only if you let me include my young people, because it's really important by then I realized the importance of the promotion system and how you needed to have papers, chapters, this, that, and the other. So I said, I have a whole bunch of young people and I would like to include them. I also told them that all the pathology and cytology textbooks are from the Northeast. And there was one guy in Chicago. I said, I would like to make it a uniquely Texas Medical Center thing. So I will include the famous and not so famous people from the Texas Medical Center. So that's how I did. And I contacted my friends at MD Anderson and I said, hey, here's an opportunity. And so I got together a team. I had to get one from memory, so George Birdsong, but we got the book out. And the first edition, actually, nobody knew how this would fly in pathology, but it turned out it did quite well. So immediately they booked us for the second edition. And then the second edition did even better than the first. And typically the first ones do better. The second did even better than the first. And then they booked us for the third. So that's the third edition, came out last September. The second edition was on the British Medical Association. They have a book award. So it was chosen as the top 5 in my specialty category. And then the finalist award. So I went to London to the BMA for the awards in 2019. But the award, the overall best book award went to a book in travel medicine. I can't compete with that. And it's travel, it's fun, all the stuff you get when you travel. And then the book that won for pathology was a book that was in its 28th edition. So for me to be in my second edition, to make it to the final 5, I thought was quite good. And of course, with all the chapters and everything that I had helped my young people, they all got promoted. I had to write a lot of promotion letters about what a wonderful job they did with the chapters, but it worked out. So my feeling is, by then I had made it, and it was my time to open doors for my young people. I mean, as a mentor, all you can do is open doors for them. What they do with the door once it's open, that's up to them. But I felt it was my moral obligation, just like my mentor, opened doors for me, then I did my thing. I think it's mine. And some of them ran with it. And I have some very famous cytopathologists who are doing very well. And when people see me, they ask me, how was my mentor doing? He's retired in California. When people see him, they ask, how's Dina doing? So I thought, hey, that's good. So there's a whole bunch of young people here that we're mentoring. And it's I think the Texas Medical Center and the Methodist and Baylor, it's a very resource-rich environment in terms of the breadth and depth of cases. You see so much here that it's this thing. And although the split with Baylor was rough, let's put it that way, we had nothing to do with it. I had to decide whether I want to stay at Baylor or Methodist. They were in a fight over me and Mary. And I decided, I looked at what was best for my residents and the teaching programs and all. And I stayed at Methodist. They promised me that they would let us continue with the teaching and all that. And they kept their word. We were one of the first residencies in pathology and the fellowship mine. Back when we were Baylor, we couldn't collaborate with Anderson because they were the competition or the enemy. Methodist said, we don't care. You can collaborate with them. So Anderson had a need for gynecologic cytology. I said, sure, send your fellows here. I said, the only problem is I'm landlocked here. if you remember, the old Methodist building had a mural of Jesus, with his arms. And whenever people ask me where is cytology, I would say between Jesus and radiology, because radiology is on the other side. Now Jesus is in the main lobby of the new building. But we were landlocked. I said, look, I'll take your fellows, but I have to keep my fellows somewhere. So why don't I, when your fellows come here, you got to park my fellows there, because I don't have a place to park them. Literally, there's no desk for me that I can put them in. So they said, okay. That's this thing. We signed the contract. The Methodist lawyers and the Anderson lawyers did their thing. And Dr. Ayala, who was the chief at Anderson, came here as vice chair, so he kind of helped facilitate. So he had actually told the program director there that, look, Methodist has a lot of these cases. You need to collaborate with them. And the boundary, once the split with Baylor occurs, they're free to do whatever. And sure enough, the day the split occurred, September 8th, 2004, I was on call the night before. I hadn't even yet turned in my beeper because, we had a Baylor beeper, and gotten the Methodist pager. He was in my office to talk about this. And I said, absolutely. And we were talking about how we could do this. And the pager people came and they took my BlackBerry and my pager and gave me a new BlackBerry and a new pager and all that. So yeah, that was so that's how our collaboration with MD Anderson began, and it's happened now. So I kind of feel like, yeah, you just do your thing as it happens. I have to say, when I started out, and I won many awards, but the ones that really matter are the ones you get from your local people, because they know you the best. And the Spute Award, that's the local Houston Society of Clinical Pathologists, and Dr. Harlan Spute mentored me in surgical pathology. He was the first attending I worked with at Bentob. And he was the protege of Lauren Ackerman, who's considered the father of surgical pathology. Of course, I had no clue when I got here about all that. I kind of learned that years later. So I basically just landed in the right place. I had no clue. It turned out that the guy who was supposed to be starting as a resident at Baylor in pathology, he was in the military. And something happened, I forget whether it was Korea or where, and the military didn't just let him go. Reagan put a hold on anybody leaving, and so he couldn't start July 1. And that's why the spot fell open. And I bumbled onto it while I was picking up my application for internal medicine. So it's just, it just happened. And I'm very grateful for it.
That's amazing. It seems like a series of sort of happy accidents that led to.
So when the Department of Pathology at Baylor turned 50 years old, Dr. Lieberman, the then chair, he commissioned a writer to write the history of the department. And the first chapter was the accidental pathologist. And she interviewed me, and I told her the story. I told you, I'm actually doing medicine, but I'm going to sit at home for a year and get pregnant. Might as well do something else. And then when the book came out, of course, I was busy doing whatever. And everybody says, Dina, that's you. I'm like, that's me, what? He says, didn't you read the book? It starts with you. That's you. They could tell from the way, sure enough, the story I told her, it was there verbatim. It's called The Doctor's Doctor, the book, and it was commissioned. And sure enough, and turns out Dr. Spute, the great pathologist, he actually started out as a surgeon, went to World War II, came back, and decided, you know what? I don't like surgery. I'm going to do pathology. So he discovered it later. And there were 3 or 4 others who were like that. And she kind of started the book with the accidental pathologist. And that was us. I said, oh, gee, I'm in such good company. I had no clue.
That's amazing. Amazing. I guess next, could you talk about your current research a little bit, and then
So,
also maybe, sorry, just a little bit about how COVID affected your work and stuff like
so uh, uh, my work is clinical, so we do case series and what we learn from that, and I've published, I don't know, 130 or 40 papers total now. But it's mostly clinical work. I was involved in some hardcore research with Dr. Michael Hegnes from orthopedics. So Dr. Spute got me inspired into orthopedic. He was retiring and he trained me to become an orthopedic bone and soft tissue pathologist. So this Dr. Hegnes came to Baylor as the chairman of orthopedics. And he had these mouse models, and then he had other research he was doing, and he needed a pathologist. So everybody said, go to Dr. Spute. Dr. Spute said, look, I'm winding down, but I have this young lady I'm training. She can be a pathologist. Okay. So I didn't have a choice. Okay. And so we would study the reactions to the steel rods and whatever in humans. And then he had a mouse model. And then his fellows would do like the nerve ending research, like get the nerve. In those days they thought that the nerve endings would not be able to regenerate, but well, we showed that if there was a certain substance, maybe things will happen and all that. So this was early. We were publishing in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, 91, 92, 93, 94. And if you remember all the breast implant stuff and the lawsuits, of course, I didn't do anything on breast implants. I would see the resected specimens, and I thought they looked awfully similar to what we were seeing in the mouse models and in the humans when they took off the rods and whatever. It's more of a local reaction, and whether it's the rod or the implant, there was a certain reaction. The body can only react in so many ways, and it was reacting. And there's all this stuff that was causing autoimmune disease and this and that, and we weren't seeing that in humans. It was, but anyway, the lawsuits were going on, and the plaintiffs were winning, and the stuff that they made, that the plastic or the silicone they used in that implant was also used to make Ommaya reservoirs for kids. These are kids who have hydrocephalus, so they put this reservoir, and then there's a tube that drains into the abdomen so that they don't collect fluid on their brain, And the company had lost the lawsuit, so they were getting ready to shut down making that silicone. And that would have affected the making of Ommaya reservoirs for kids. And Dr. Ralph Feigen, by then DeBakey had stepped down as the chief at Baylor, and Dr. Ralph Feigen, the chief at Texas Children's, became. Ironically, one of the people who was for the plaintiff and claiming that it caused all these diseases, whereas we thought it was just a localized reaction, was a neurologist at Baylor and at Methodist. So, of course, he had a castle. He made a lot of money and had a castle in France. So Ralph Feigen, when they heard about the Ommaya reservoir, and those days they had no alternate supply for the Ommaya reservoir silicone. So he said, hey, if any one of you is doing any research on this implants and stuff, please let us know, because it's going to affect the Ommaya reservoirs. So there I was, tooling around with my little mice, and then looking at the removed specimens, in humans. So I told my chairman, and I guess he passed on the word. And they said, well, would you be willing to talk about your findings to these lawyers, the Baylor lawyers? And they said, yeah. So I talked about what I was seeing, and they said, oh, this is very interesting. It might be useful. Next thing I knew, there was a law firm called Beck Red. I don't do lawsuits, okay? So Beck, Redden, and Seacrest, and they were the defense lawyers for McGann Medical, which was the maker of the silicone that was used for Ommaya reservoirs, for breast implants, and a whole bunch of other things. But they were going to shut it down because they didn't want a legal liability, because it was costing them too much money. So they came and took my deposition. I explained the findings. He said, would you be willing to test? And I said, of course, I mean, it's a good cause. Uh, so then the plaintiff lawyers came, and the plaintiff lawyers was John O'Quinn. I had no clue who he was. So I remember at 9 o'clock at night, they had these video depositions of me in my office. In those days, I was in the smaller office across the hall. And he was kind of nasty. But I told him, this is what we saw. It's a localized reaction. It looks just like the whatever. Well, anyway, the case went to court. And I remember I was one of the last or the second last witnesses for the defense. So they put me up there, and there were these ladies claiming they got this arthritis and whatever. Then I got put up on the thing, and I said, well, what I have seen is it's a localized reaction. And whether you put in this plastic or you put that rod over there, the metal rod, well, the histiocytes eat up the metal in the rod. So, and then they sit there fat and happy. At the most, they'll drain to the lymph node, but they're not doing anything. If you put silicone there, they'll eat up the silicone. You'll get fat and happy, drain to the lymph node. So we've not seen that. And they said, oh, but these ladies have fatty liver disease. I said, look, fatty liver, now we all know that. I said, look, anybody who's fat will have fat in the liver too. I said, I'm sure I have some. Boy, John O'Quinn was nasty. He was threatening me. And, I mean, at that time, I think my daughter was like 3 years old. And the judge finally had to admonish him for intimidating me. And then there was another one. Then after my testimony, one other pathologist testified, and then he was a regular for the defense. I was the newbie, but I was quite shaken up. But they were very nice afterwards, and the judge apologized and said, you don't have to worry. And it was the first lawsuit that came out for the defense. And that McGann Medical didn't pull the plug on the silicone. And then the whole tide turned, and people realized that it causes the localized reaction, but it doesn't give you all these other diseases they were claiming it was creating, like fatty liver. It had nothing to do. If you're fat, you're going to have a fatty liver. We all know that now. But at that time, they didn't know that. And it was so. And then when they asked the jury foreman, the main guy, the chief juror, and he said, yeah, actually, it was that lady pathologist who really made sense. And that made us realize that she had nothing to do with this. She was doing her own little thing in her own little world with her rats and her rods. And she realized that the two looked similar. And so my little claim to fame, after that, I never did another lawsuit or anything. But that turned the tide. And then the whole thing died. And I'm sure there are other substitutes now for the Omiya reservoir, but I feel like contributed in a teeny tiny way with all those kids with water on their brain. But it was basically Dr. Ralph Heigen sending a memo to all that, like, if you have something that can help us defend, otherwise we are going to lose the Omiya reservoir, and we don't have an immediate replacement for that type of silicone. And because it was doing great for kids. The kids, nothing was happening, but it was all these fake claims. And now we all know, you don't get fatty liver from having a breast implant. You get fatty liver because you're fat or you're drinking too much, whatever.
And then what was your work like during COVID?
So when COVID happened, that was quite a shock. And, Methodist, ironically, the hospital came into being during the Spanish flu because there weren't enough beds. And this doctor decided to build this hospital in a house near downtown that he had. Fast forward 100 years, and Methodist really stepped up to the plate during COVID. And it was my department, my chairman, Dr. Musser, the current chairman, he's Mr. Whole Genome Sequencing. He was sequencing things back in 2002 when he was at Baylor, all the bugs and the viruses and whatever else. So when COVID hit, he got his clinical. I don't do clinical pathology anymore. I'm subspecialized. But he got his team together, and we really got the testing up and running. Of course, while all this was happening and the place was shut down, I had an observer from Thailand. I had to ship back on the very last flight out of the US to Thailand. And she was like, no, I don't want to go. I said, no, you have to go because you won't be able to go. Literally had to put her on the last flight out of Houston to Japan, Tokyo, and then to Bangkok. But I got her out in time. And then, of course, everything shut down. But you see, the work still goes on. I mean, people with cancer still get cancer. The problem was that people were so terrified of coming to the hospital because they thought they'll get COVID that they would sit on whatever they had and this thing. So on Mother's Day, I'm on call. It's a night call. And I get called at, I forget, midnight, 2 in the morning. Some guy got flighted in from Tomball or somewhere. And what it was that it turns out that he couldn't swallow, but he didn't want to go to the hospital. So finally he ruptures his esophagus. So they get him in here. He's on the operating table at 2 in the morning. They go in and they say, well, gee, is this cancer or is this an abscess that has ruptured? Well, yours truly is on call. So there's Mother's Day. I'm here, 2 o'clock in the morning, doing a frozen, and it's cancer. And basically, we have patients. This is just an example I'm giving you without giving you any confidential information. But basically, there were patients who would not come into the hospital or come until it was really bad. And after post-COVID, I came to work pretty much every day because there were, we let the younger people stay at home with the kids and all, but the old dogs, we didn't have a kid at home or anything. We just had a husband. So we came in and we tried to do whatever cases, emergency cases. And because, the cancers are cancers, they're going to grow, and the bugs are bugs and they're going to grow. So while the clinical part did all the testing and they set up the little thing for the Texas Medical Center and all that, we at our end, we were doing the cancer diagnosis. There were transplants still going on and stuff like that. So we still had to take care of those. So if you get called in the 1 o'clock in the morning to tell them if the liver is good or no good to transplant the donor liver, all that went on. So we still went on with that. So in that sense, we didn't miss a heartbeat. The kind of work I do, I can't do from home. I have to be physically here to, when I get the specimen, I can't sit and look at it on a camera. I have to touch and feel it and decide what needs to be frozen so that I can get to the correct diagnosis. And that you can't do on a camera. So a lot of people whom we didn't need to come in didn't come in, but there was always a small crew that was here, and I was one of them. And we did our part. And once the hospital opened up, there was this huge rush of people who had sat at home, and now they came and worse off with more advanced disease. And I would say for a year or two, we were picking up cancers that were much more advanced than what we were before. So on the breast biopsy service, we would originally find these millimeter cancers. Now suddenly we're finding 1 and 2 centimeter cancers because these women sat at home. They didn't want to come into the hospital. They didn't want to go. They missed their mammograms. They missed their colonoscopies. So we were finding bigger and a higher stage 1 for some time. I think things are now settling down. So that's kind of what we observed in our practice. And Methodist is a huge, and the lab at the mothership is a system-wide laboratory, and that's one of the labs I direct. But we sort of noticed that so there were many more things that happened during COVID, not just COVID. It's all the other things that got affected. I mean, I know the kids got messed up sitting at home and fell back in their studies. But there were a lot of cancers that didn't get diagnosed or got diagnosed when they ruptured something, an organ, and had to be helicoptered in, or they sat on it till they were bigger. So instead of catching it at stage 1, we would catch it at stage 3. And so that sort of stuff,
That's a side effect of the whole situation that I had never thought about before. Man. I guess we're going to move away from your work now, and I'd like to ask a little bit about your family. You mentioned you had 2 kids?
Yeah, they're grown up.
Um, what kind of values do you emphasize in their upbringing, and have you kept them like connected to your heritage, and do you ever visit your family in India, stuff like that?
I tried, but where I come, uh, when we got here and my kids were little, we had a very small community. So once or twice a year, we would meet at someone's house. We never had a center, a community center or anything. That didn't happen until 97. By then, my son was already in high school. My daughter was in middle school. So we keep in touch with the community. But if they're here in town, when my daughter's in town, we take her. But at that time, we would usually meet at someone's house. So that's how we were saying. I always told them, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, respect everything. Uh, uh, Respect all of God's creations, animate and inanimate objects, uh, and live your life, live a clean life. Don't harm anyone, don't do anything illegal, uh, and just very simple. We kept it simple. There's no temple or idol or anything we have to worship because we're such an ancient culture. Uh, we just we just respect all of God's creations and live a clean life with good thoughts, good words, good deeds, help other people out whenever you can. My son's a cardiovascular anesthesiologist. He practices in Houston. My daughter is an OBGYN. She practices in central Denver. So I think we did okay with both careers, raising two kids who have a little grandbaby. He's 2 years old. And he's the joy of our life, keeps us in stitches.
I guess, are there any ways that you sort of adapted new traditions or like continued old traditions after moving here or like when raising your kids and stuff? I don't know if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
so like we celebrate spring, Navruz. So we set a little table with all the fruits and vegetables. It's the beginning of the new year, plants, animals, everyone. So we set up a little table with that, and we say a small, thank you, God, for all of your creations, and then we eat. And then now that we have a community center, we do the same thing at the center. We have an event, the kids have little dances and whatever. We put up a little, see, we didn't have anything like that. So kids couldn't participate in that. They would have sports event in which my kids participated. They were reasonably good at it. I didn't have an athletic bone in me. But now it's a much bigger, there's like, I don't know, 500 people showing up, even the ones from San Antonio and Austin come in. And, so the new year we'll celebrate and they'll set up a big table and explain the significance of all the things, the egg, which is new life, ovum, things like that. And we we eat and have a good time after the kids are done dancing and the music, and then we eat and then we dance. And my kids will, if they're here or they're not on call, they'll come and they'll catch up with their old friends from the community. But my son has stayed more in touch being in Houston. My daughter in Denver, Denver's doesn't have too many of us. So but my kids are totally integrated into the American way of life. So we've had no issues. But in some ways, it's been a blessing that uh, the religion we follow is really a philosophy on life, and it's so ancient that it doesn't tell us that I have to fast or I have to do certain things. Thank God. It doesn't stop us from eating. And we celebrate everything. We celebrate Christmas. We had Santa Claus. We have the gifts. We do everything. If the Hindus have their Diwali and there's an event, we'll be happy to go and eat all the sweets. If the Muslims have Eid and they bring a tray of something, we'll happily eat it. Uh, we have no problem. We follow all having grown up in India, we followed all the cultures, you know. So the Hindus on the other thing, they always give out sweets. Hey, we were there to eat them, and yeah, the kids are the same way. We follow all cultures, and it's a good thing. I've never been too, like I said, it's more of a philosophy on how you live your life. So it's been easier for me in that sense that we are not so tied into anything.
That sounds wonderful. The next question is kind of a pretty broad one, but how would you describe your identity?
I think my work defines me. I think that's what I identify with. My work defines me. And that's the other thing I I haven't figured out. I mean, I could retire now if I want to, but I haven't figured out that thing I want to do in my retirement. I know I can't sit at home. I have to do something that'll help the greater good, and I haven't figured that out. The day I figure that out, I will retire and do that. But so far, I haven't. So I enjoy working with the young residents, encouraging them, my young faculty, encouraging them to move up, and opening doors for them. And so I kind of have more of this motherly attitude, but again, it's all tied into my work. So I think in some ways my work defines me.
And then I guess a little bit about just the US's treatment of Asians and Asian Americans recently, since there's been a sort of rise in hate and discrimination against all
Yeah, that is a
minorities.
shame. It shouldn't be that way. I never felt, I mean, yeah, I was the butt of a few bad jokes, but partly because I didn't understand some of the stuff. But yeah, it's sad that we're so, it's come to that. And I didn't feel that way. I mean, when I started at Baylor and Methodist, there were all kinds. I mean, DeBakey was there. He was a Lebanese Christian. Earl Stanley Crawford was a white guy from Boston. Uh, uh, I, they didn't treat us any differently. Uh, in fact, almost feel like it's gotten worse now. There's too much of you're this group and I'm that group, and you know, I never felt it that way. I just felt like you give it your best and let the chips fall where they may. I never considered myself like I'm this, so I should be. You know, you just do your thing and let the chips fall where they may. And if you got recognition, great. If you didn't get recognition, great. I wasn't looking for anything. But now it's become so divisive. It shouldn't be that way. There's too much. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. And I realize this country has a history. Of course, my ancestors were being slaughtered elsewhere. They sought refuge in India. But that doesn't mean I hate everyone who was slaughtering my ancestors. You move on. You know, 8, 9 generations, just move on. Think of the now and what you're doing now and what you can contribute to society now. And don't be so stuck and so, you know, I mean, what's the current generation have to do with what happened in the past? And I certainly don't have anything to do with what happened in the past in this country. But so I'm an outsider looking in, and I'm like, why? This is so unnecessary. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why? It's so unnecessary. When both my kids were delivered by a black OB-GYN. I love Wondermart. My first pediatrician was Black, Dr. Roosevelt. I followed him to Kelsey also after he closed his practice, but then they kept on shuttling me around, so I went to another one. But it's just gotten so divisive, and shouldn't be that way. It's just wrong. And trying to make some poor kid feel guilty about what his ancestors did 150 years ago. Stop it. It's enough. And I'm just an outsider looking in. And like I said, I don't bear any ill will towards the people who slaughtered my ancestors, because I know the people now don't do that. It doesn't mean it was right. It's just times have changed. Move on. There are so many opportunities in this country. Don't get stuck in the past. Move on.
The next question is a bit of a tone shift, but do you have any advice for young people who might want to go down a similar path to you, or just advice for anyone who's unsure what they want to do in life or how to go about it?
Sometimes you may be sure what you want to do, but life takes a different turn. And so make the best of the opportunities that come your way, give it your all, and you'll find something there that works. I mean, I thought I was going to be an internist until I discovered pathology. So keep an open mind. Don't be that, oh, I have to do this, and if I can't do this, then I'm no good, or it's not the end of the world. Embrace new opportunities, keep an open mind, give it your best. And if you're really good at what you do, the opportunities will come. Give it your best.
Thank you. And then you mentioned you love to keep busy. So what about any lessons on like time management and stuff like that you've learned?
Well, so here's the thing. My husband has an equally busy career. But one thing we always did was we decided that one of us was always going to be around with the kids. And when the other one was traveling or was busy with dinners and meetings and all that. So that was the rule. We never left our kids with, well, we couldn't afford nannies then, but even then, even when my mother was there, one of us was always there. We never left them. And I've said no to major opportunities to speak or be in committees because we had decided that my husband had his meeting to be somewhere else. And one such thing was a very important meeting in Baltimore that I could have been in on September 10th, 2001. But I said no, and I found a replacement. So another pathologist went in my place because my husband had to be in London for a very important meeting. Well, his meeting got over, and on the 10th, I was with the kids, so I gave up my slot and let somebody else do it. And he got some publications out of it, but that's okay. And it turns out no, they were flying via London, I forget. Anyway, they missed they missed their connection, and the airline said, you can stay here, we'll pay for they missed a connection in Amsterdam. So the airline said, you can stay here, we'll pay you. Or my husband said, no, I have to be back in Houston. Get me on a flight to North America and I'll figure out a way to get into Texas. So he got on the last flight out to Vancouver. And then from Vancouver, he took a late flight into Houston, got in at 2 a.m. That was 9/11. His friends who had a great time in Amsterdam that night on the airlines died. He got stuck in Gander. Remember, they landed all the planes, ended up in Gander for like weeks. But we always, my husband, 2 o'clock in the morning, he made it because he had said, we're going to be here with the kid. We had no idea about 9/11 or any of that. It just happened. So he got in at 2 in the morning and then 9/11 happened. Those guys sat in Gander. So stay focused, keep your word, and keep your end of the bargain, so you kind of have to have your priorities, even though it was giving up a great opportunity and not being in Baltimore for that very important meeting with pathologists, gynecologists, all kinds of people from NIH. I opted to be with my kids. My husband said, I'll be here. He got here on time no matter what. And 9/11 happened, and we were here intact as a family. Because it would have been horrible if he was stuck in Gander with the rest of them, and I was here. So it all, stay true to what you want to do for your family, and wherever life takes you.
Thank you. And then I think we're gonna start wrapping up now since it's
Yeah, I
quite a
might get
while.
called.
Do you have any like final messages or closing remarks that you'd like to share?
Make the most of opportunities that come your way. Be kind. It doesn't cost you anything to be nice to people. Don't worry so much about yourself. Think of the greater good. And once you've reached a certain point in your career, consider it your moral obligation to help others out and open doors for others. A rising tide floats all boats, and do what you think is the best for your patients, your colleagues, your profession, and all good will come out of that. Don't think about what's in it for me. Think about what's in it for the greater good, and it all works out. And be intellectually curious, rather than, and like, why is this not working, or why is this different, and I was a butt of many jokes. You just shrug off, it's people who treat you that way, that's them. It's their loss if they're stuck in their ways. Don't let yourself don't wallow in that mud of self-pity. Get out of that. Just move on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with me today and for taking the time out of your schedule to do it. I'm really honored that I got to interview you.
It was nice. I'm happy to talk. It's just that things get crazy. So I was here at 6:30 in the morning. I already started my day. I have a new faculty starting next door. So I already told my techs, she's coming. Please do this, that. So I kind of took care of that. I had my coffee, so I'm ready for the day. I'm on call tonight, so I'm going to be here till late. So this was a good day. Thank you.